Imagine being on a plane, surrounded by friends, laughter, and dreams, believing the trip will be just another happy chapter of your life. Now imagine that within hours, that same trip would turn into one of the greatest survival stories in modern history. In October 1972, Flight 571, carrying a Uruguayan rugby team to Chile, vanished in the Andes after a tragic crash. What seemed like an immediate ending turned into the beginning of an unimaginable journey. Surrounded by frozen mountains with no food, facing sub-zero temperatures and completely isolated from the world, the survivors were forced to battle not only against nature, but also against their own human limits. This is not just the story of an air disaster. It is a story of impossible choices, unimaginable courage, and a fight that lasted for weeks, where each day felt like a miracle. How did they manage to endure in one of the harshest environments on Earth? What difficult decisions were made when all hope seemed lost? And how, against all odds, did some of them return to tell the world what really happened? Today on AI History, you will discover Flight 571, the true story behind survivors of the Andes, one of the most extraordinary tales of human resistance ever recorded. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. And tell me in the comments, do you think you could have survived in the Andes for so many days, facing cold, hunger, and isolation? The year was 1972. The old Christians Club rugby team from Montevideo had been invited to play a friendly match in Chile. For them, it wasn't just a game. It was an opportunity to travel, bond with friends, and live an unforgettable adventure. The chartered Fairchild FH-227 departed Uruguay filled with young athletes, their families, friends, and the crew. In total, 45 people boarded the flight. The atmosphere was joyful, with laughter, songs, and excitement about reaching Santiago. After a stop in Mendoza, Argentina, the flight was delayed due to poor weather conditions over the Andes. But nobody worried. It was just a minor setback. The next day, the plane resumed its journey. From above, the Andes looked breathtaking. Snow-covered peaks, vast valleys, and a scenery so beautiful it seemed unreal. Passengers took photos, enjoying the ride, unaware that those same mountains would soon become their greatest challenge. For them, it was the trip of a lifetime. But in just a few hours, this dream would turn into a nightmare written into history. On October 13, 1972, the plane resumed its flight toward Chile. Weather conditions appeared more stable, but navigating the Andes was always risky. Clouds often hid the towering peaks, demanding total precision from the pilots. Inside the cockpit, the crew miscalculated their position. Believing they were closer to Santiago, they began descending too early. In reality, they were still deep in the heart of the Andes. Suddenly, massive mountains emerged ahead like walls of ice. The pilot tried to maneuver, but it was too late. The aircraft struck the mountainside, breaking apart before sliding down the snow until it finally came to rest in a remote valley over 3,500 meters high. Inside the wreckage, chaos reigned. Many were injured, others disoriented, and the freezing winds rushed through the broken fuselage. Far from civilization, surrounded by endless mountains, the survivors quickly realized the truth. They were completely alone, and what seemed like a short wait for rescue would become a 72-day nightmare against the merciless Andes. In the first hours after the crash, the survivors focused on helping the injured and creating shelter inside the remains of the fuselage. At night, temperatures dropped far below zero, and the icy winds cut through their bodies. They soon realized they were trapped in one of the harshest places on Earth. Over 3,500 meters above sea level, no trees, no animals, and barely any oxygen. The available food was minimal. A few chocolates, biscuits, bottles of wine, and small amounts of snacks from the trip. Everything was rationed to the smallest crumb, but within days, scarcity became unbearable. At first, they clung to hope. Rescue planes flew overhead, and the survivors waved pieces of metal and cloth, trying desperately to signal. But the white fuselage blended perfectly into the snowy landscape, making them invisible from above. Days turned into weeks, and no help arrived. They melted snow for water, crafted improvised tools, and tried to keep faith alive. Yet, with each passing night, despair grew stronger. The dream of a quick rescue was gone. Every new day felt like both a victory and a curse. And soon, they would face decisions that no human being should ever be forced to make. Weeks had passed, and the survivors clung to a fragile hope. Then, through the plane's damaged radio, they heard the devastating news. The official search had been called off. For the outside world, they were already gone. That moment changed everything. Survival now depended entirely on their own choices. With no food left, the group entered into discussions that tore at their moral and emotional limits. They debated for hours, wrestling with unthinkable possibilities. Some resisted, others argued it was the only way forward. Finally, they reached a painful consensus. In order to stay alive, they would have to cross a boundary no one should ever face. It wasn't a choice taken lightly. It was born of desperation, a decision forced upon them by the mountains themselves. And even for those who accepted it, the psychological weight would remain with them forever. Beyond the cold and hunger, now each survivor carried an inner battle, a struggle with conscience and the instinct to survive. But from that suffering, a new idea emerged. A small group of the strongest and most determined decided they would not wait any longer. They would climb the mountains and search for help, no matter the risk. By then, over 2 months had passed. Waiting was no longer an option. A few survivors volunteered to attempt the impossible, to cross the Andes on foot. They had no proper clothing or gear. Still, they improvised with blankets, crafted crude snowshoes, and made makeshift sunglasses from plastic to protect their eyes. They prepared tiny portions of food and set out on a journey that seemed suicidal. Every step was exhausting. The snow dragged at their legs, the thin air made breathing agonizing, and the icy winds tore at their skin. Nights were unbearable, and at times they doubted they could go on. But they kept walking, not only for themselves, but for everyone left behind. After more than a week of endless marching through the white wilderness, they finally saw signs of life: a stream, footprints, and eventually Chilean herders living in the valleys below. The message was delivered. Help was on the way. The impossible journey had become the act of courage that would change everything. For the first time in 72 days, there was real hope. When helicopters finally reached the crash site in December 1972, the ordeal of more than 2 months was over. One by one, the survivors were lifted from the frozen mountains. To the world, it seemed like a miracle. News spread fast, and soon the story of Flight 571 captured headlines around the globe. People wanted to know how ordinary young men had managed to survive in one of the harshest places on Earth. Books, documentaries, and films followed, from Alive, 1993, to the recent Society of the Snow, 2023, each revisiting the tale of endurance, despair, and courage. More than a survival story, it became a symbol of the human spirit's ability to adapt under the most extreme conditions. For some, the survivors were heroes. For others, the choices they made remained controversial. But above all, they proved that the will to live can overcome even the cruelest of circumstances. The wreckage still lies in the Andes, a frozen monument to their struggle. And Flight 571 is remembered not as an accident, but as one of the most powerful lessons in human resilience. Flight 571 was not just a tragedy in the Andes. It was a story of endurance, of solidarity, and of choices no one should ever face. For 72 days, young men who set out for a simple rugby match became symbols of survival and human strength. Each night endured, each step across the snow, each painful choice, all became part of a story that continues to echo across generations. Even half a century later, the question remains: how far would we go to survive? And I ask you, if you had been there, do you think you would have endured? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to AI History, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next journeys into the darkest chapters of the past. Because history, even in its most painful pages, always has something to teach us.